more fight announcements coming out of the Prime card, and it's actually Kingpyn fighters making their way over to the Misfits card. Let's talk about it and how big of a move this actually is. Now, originally I was making this video specifically about Kenny versus AT. Now, if you don't know, there's going to be a big fight there on the Prime card, and that was announced last week. However, since then, actually, as of recording this, just a few hours ago, we got another fight announced on the Prime card, and that is Whindersson Nunes versus MyMateNate. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these two names, well, don't worry, I got you covered. These are two fighters coming fresh off the Kingpyn event, both having suffered one loss from KingKenny. So, of course, you already know these fight announcements are going to be exciting. Let's go ahead and break down these three fights real quick and talk about the advantages for these Kingpyn, now Misfits fighters. Now, let's start with Kenny. Now, to be honest, Kenny was on Misfits before he was on Kingpyn, so it's hard to classify him as a Kingpyn fighter, but of course, his most recent fights, all on Kingpyn. Good to see him back on the Misfits cards, but now let's break down how he's going to win against AT. Now, Anthony Taylor is known for his quote-unquote peekaboo style, similar to what Mike Tyson does. Run in tight, go straight to the body, try to get on the inside, and just fight from there. Realistically, it works for AT because he is the smaller guy. However, when you have a KingKenny that you're going up against, there's a lot more that you're going to have to deal with than he's seen in a lot of his other fights. This is what makes Kenny a favorite in my eyes for this fight, because Kenny's strongest attribute is his jab. This thing is easily one of the best in crossover boxing, if not the best jab, if you don't consider Tommy Fury a part of the scene. I don't know, it's so hard to tell nowadays. But nevertheless, of course, KingKenny is going to go in strong jab, and that's going to be his best weapon against AT. Now, that's not his only weapon, though, because KingKenny is by far one of the best and most technical fighters on all of crossover boxing cards. His continual improvement alongside Daily Perales has shown that they are not only working on how to beat influencer boxers, but they're working on being able to beat any boxer that's put in front of Kenny, which honestly, props to them. Daily has said that from day one. He trains his fighters to fight fighters. He doesn't train them to fight crossover boxers. And if crossover boxers happen to go in their way, don't worry, they're going to take them out because they know how to fight. And you can really see it in both KingKenny and Deji. It doesn't matter who you put in front of them. They have improved drastically alongside Daily Perales. Now, of course, AT does have some wins. He did just beat Salt Poppy, which arguably Salt Poppy was one of the best in the scene until that loss. I don't think that loss makes a big difference. That's a whole nother video I can make on that. But to be honest, I still don't see AT having a performance against Kenny that people are anticipating. Now, people have hyped up AT to be a fighter very similar to those of like an Idris Virgo and some of these other pros because of his MMA background. But realistically, that's not fair to AT. He's just started on the boxing side of things. His MMA background was not heavy into striking. And while he's done some stuff, he really hadn't done too much in the works of boxing until he started in the crossover space. I think this pairing up against KingKenny is actually 100% perfect for him. I think skill level wise, they're pretty even. And with KingKenny's advantages in both lankiness, length, and size, and of course that incredible jab, it's going to be a tough night for AT if he wants to come out on top. But we're not focusing on AT right now because we're talking about the quote-unquote Kingpyn fighters coming over to Misfits. So, KingKenny, I have you taking this one, but you're not the only fighter we're talking about today. Of course, we're going to jump over to the next fight, which is Whindersson Nunes versus MyMateNate. Now, this one is pretty interesting. Both suffering a loss from KingKenny in the Kingpyn event and now coming head-to-head against one another. So let's start with Whindersson Nunes, where I think he's at, and realistically what he can do to beat Nate. Now, Nunes is a slow start fighter. He takes a little bit of time, typically most of the first round, to figure out where his opponent is at. He hides behind the jab quite well and just kind of sticks, moves, trying to figure out the timing and the pace of the other fighter. While this is good for some, I've noticed that if Whindersson doesn't find his pace or isn't finding the timing against his opponent, like we saw against KingKenny, he ends up just shutting down and almost becomes a punching bag to his opponent. That's exactly what happened against Kenny, and I can see the same thing happening against Nate if he doesn't have a little bit more confidence coming out of the first round. Now, of course, Whindersson brings alongside the community of Brazil and a massive fan base to bring to the ring. While, of course, having people root for you gives some advantages in hyping you up for the fight, it's not everything. So while that is a slight quote-unquote advantage to the environment, it's not going to be everything. because my mate Nate is going to show up to fight. Now, Nate has a lot to prove. This man has been on a few cards now, been in a few fights, and unfortunately for him, he's got to been put up against opposition that is well above his skill range. I mean, look at the fight with Kenny. Kenny had like 4 or 5 fights before Nate, and so that experience stacks up, especially against someone that's newer to the boxing space all around. Now, Nate did show some promise at moments, but realistically, Kenny is just too much to deal with at his skill level. Now, the pairing with Whindersson Nunes, I feel is a little bit more fair. That's why this one's going to be kind of hard to call.
I know a lot of people out there are going to be like, oh, Whindersson Nunes cleans him up, he takes him out, it's not going to be a serious fight.
But do not underestimate my mate Nate. This guy has something to prove, in my opinion, more than Whindersson Nunes does. And both of these guys, while they're going to go into fight, he's got a lot more on the line, and this could be potentially his last chance to show up, fight, and make a name for himself here in this space. Will these Kingpyn fighters show up in a big way? I don't know yet. I can't wait to figure it out. This fight is just a month away, but before then, we got the Misfits 009 card, so we got a lot of content in preparation to come out for that. But of course, until then, we'll see you on the next one. Peace, y'all.